It's Sunday night, and we're teaching on the doctrine of the devil and what it means. Whenever you see the word devil in the Bible, in the New Testament, it's not the word demon. There's no such word as the word demon other than what we've invented. There's no such thing as demons. We get our word demon from, I've said this so many times, from D-A-I-M-O-N-I-O-N, daimonion. Now, daimonion is, the root of that is D-A-I-O. Dio means to distribute fortunes. Now that has a long history behind it. It doesn't just mean, it does mean anybody who's preaching a doctrine of distributing fortunes, that's the doctrine of the devil. You got two words that's been translated into the word devil in the New Testament Greek text. One is the word daimonion, and the other is the word diabolos. Diabolos means one who traduces. A traducer is one who leads across forbidden lines, one who deceives and leads astray. And that's what the devil does when he goes to distributing fortunes. The Bible says in 1 Timothy 4:1, that in the latter times some shall depart from faith. They'll depart. They'll leave faith. Depart from faith. Now, you can't depart from faith unless you're in the faith. People that's never believed anything, of course, believe in faith, the same word, believe, the verb, faith, the noun. People who believe, they're the only ones that can depart from believing. You won't cease believing God, but you'll just quit living for Him. You'll quit crucifying the flesh and telling truth. Well, depart, apistome is the word. And there's many, many words that are derivations of this word histome. Histome is in a long list of words, and most words in the Greek are that are called morphemes, M-O-R-P-H-E-M-E-S. Morpheme means shape, word shapes. And when you get into word shapes, you usually, if you're looking at something in your concordance, look at the words before it. Everything is in an exact chronological order. If you look into your concordance and you look up the word world in John 3:16, it'll tell you right beside that it's 2889. Be sure and look at 2888, 2887, 2886, 2884, 2885, because it'll tell you, and you'll see right before it, that these words right before world are spelled nearly the same way world is. You'll see that world is the word cosmos, and you'll see that one of these words that's right before it will say cosmios, C-O-S, M-I-O-S, and one will say K-O-S, M-I-K-O-S, cosmikos. And then if you take your Webster's dictionary, and if you look up cosmetic, you say, that looks like cosmetic. You look up cosmetic, it'll tell you it comes from the Greek cosmikos. And then it'll say it's related back to 2869 or something like that. And it'll say it comes from that. And you look over there and it'll say K-O-M-I-Z-O. And that means to tend to something or to take care of. And it'll say that comes from K-O-M-E. And that means the hair. And we get our word comb from that word K-O-M-E. So while you're looking words up in your concordance, look at the words after and before, because that is a list of morphemes. Have you noticed that when you're looking something up? They're morphically, I guess that's a word, connected to each other. So these are morphemes. And histome has some morphemes. It has some, the word morphe means shape. And I've said this many times. When I was in the 10th grade, in Mr. Silverberg's class in in Beaumont, I was in high school, and he taught us about a metamorphosis of a grasshopper. Metamorphosis. And metamorphosis means the developmental stages. It starts off as a larvae, and then it gets longer, and it becomes another stage, and then before you know it, it's got these legs on it and got this head, and it develops, and that's called a metamorphosis. That's much the same thing as a sumorphos. Remember that? Sumorphos. Summorphos. If you notice, morphos is in both of these words. And sum is it's more or less a synonym. It's a sort of a synonym with meta. Meta means with, and sum means to blend with or synthesize with. So when you have sumorphos, that is to be conformed. When we are conformed to the image of Christ, whom he did foreknow, he also did predestinate to be conformed. So when we're conformed, we go through a metamorphosis. We start off with baby believers. Paul said we were babes in Christ. And then we grow and we become children and then become mature later on, just like the grasshopper, or just like the caterpillar that weaves spins a cocoon and it comes out a butterfly. That's a metamorphosis. So similarly, we start off as baby believers. We don't become another form. Well, we do in the sense of spiritually, we get rid of the old man and so forth. So that's what a morpheme is. It's word shapes of words when you go into studying words. And this word histome, there is no H's. It's just I-S-T-E-M-I with the diacritical mark there. That's the breathing sound. Histome. Well, some of the morphemes of histome would be staros, stasis, stereos, and the list goes on and on. These morphemes will go on 25 or 30 words sometimes. So this word histome comes from the word stasis. It means to stand. And histome means to be upright. This is the broadness of the Greek language. When they said something was upright, they said it would stand. And the word staros is the word cross. And cross is not the word in the text. It means a stake. A stake is upright, and a cross was an upright stake. It was an upright stake. And yes, men were crucified on stakes, but they carried the cross piece with them. This upright piece was called the stipes, S-T-I-P-E-S. And then they would carry this cross piece, and in the first century, when Jesus went to Golgotha, they put it on his back, and they would always carry that cross piece, and they would tie their hands on it. I used to think that was a blasphemy when I was a kid. Thought, well, they carried a cross. No, they didn't carry the cross like that. The Romans figured out if they carried a cross and they would drop them in the hole, they dug a hole here up on this mountain, and then they dropped them in the hole with the cross already constructed. They found out if they dropped them in there, sometimes they would come flying off the cross. It'd go thud, and they'd go pop off the cross. So the Romans figured out how to make it a torture device. So they put a notch in this stake. This is why the Jehovah's Witnesses say that Jesus was crucified on a stake. Well, it was a stake, but it was a cross, because the only part they carried was this part, and that was called the patibulum. They carried the patibulum like this, like so, and then they would lay the guy down, nail him to this, and then they would pick it up, and they had a notch up here in the top of this, and they would hook him in that notch, and it would throw his body forward, and he would hang there and be out of joint. And Jesus was out of joint, and they put a footstool right there, and in that kind of position, they could not breathe. They could breathe in, but they couldn't exhale, so they had to push themselves up on that footstool in order to breathe out. That's why when Jesus didn't die by that evening, and it was against the law, Jewish law, to have a man hanging on a cross on the Sabbath, and the Sabbath, their days begin at 6 o'clock in the evening. This is another proof that Jesus died on Friday, or he died on the preparation day. Their days began at 6 and ended at 6. Well, it was against Jewish law to have a man on a cross on the Sabbath. So they came around, they saw that Jesus was dead already, and they didn't break his legs. If they broke their legs, they couldn't push themselves up and breathe. So they found out he was dead already, and he couldn't have had his legs broken because he was the Lamb of God. He was the Passover lamb. And the shadow in the Old Testament was the Passover lamb, and no bone could be broken of the Passover lamb, and it had to be disjointed, and Jesus was disjointed on this cross because he was on that stipes. So this word staros does mean stake, but the Jehovah's Witnesses don't know this over here. They don't know anything about it. They've never studied the crosses. Of course, the men who found out if you drop a man in the hole and he'd come flying off the cross, the people who found that were the people of Carthage and the people of Phoenicia. Phoenicia is what we call Lebanon, right here above Israel. And they found out that you couldn't do that. So when the Romans got a hold of the cross, they'd been crucifying men on crosses for over 200 years before Jesus. Crosses were a common thing. It was common for anybody, for a lot of men to die on crosses. During Spartacus' Great Rebellion, when the gladiators rebelled against Rome and they broke out, they crucified about 6,000 of them on the Appian Way to Rome. So that was common. When Jesus said, if any man will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. They all knew what a cross was. He wasn't the first man to die on a cross. People think Jesus is the first person to ever die on a cross. No, he wasn't. Thousands of people had died on crosses. But the Romans honed it to a torture tool. They had it where a man would hang there for days and days, and then he would go into a raging fever, and then it would come down, and then it'd go back up, and then the birds of the air would come and sit on him and pick his eyeballs out, and he'd be there alive. The cross was one of the most diabolical, scheming ways to kill a man that's ever been invented. And he would languish there for 7 or 8 or 10 days on a cross. Whew. What a way to die. What a way to die. So it was a stake. That was the stipes. But you can't just come up and say, Jesus died on a stake. Well, yes, but it was a cross. But this word staros is a common Greek word for stake. So when he says, take up your cross, he says, be upright. In the first century, if a man was upright means honest and true and living right and being the way you're supposed to be. That's upright. And they said a man was upright. So histome or stasis meant to stand upright or be upright, and it had to do with a stake. And a stake was going to be vertical to the ground. It was going to be straight to the ground. So, anyway, when we said some shall depart from the faith, they will stand, and it depends on the word and the context as the interpretation and the exactness. This word means to stand apo. Stand apo, apart. So, in the latter times, some shall stand apart from the faith. I've had people tell me, somebody this past week said, I looked up that word prayer and it didn't say to bow to the will of God. It doesn't say that in the concordance. It'll tell you it comes from this number. It'll say proseuchomai. If you look up prayer, it'll say proseuchomai. That's what it'll say, or P. It'll say this right here. Proseuchomai. That's the same word in English. It'll say proseuchomai. Well, and it'll say to pray. It doesn't say to bow to the will of God, but that's what it means. And here's why. You break the syllables down. It'll say it comes from this 1423. That's not the number. And I'm just making some up. And 5196. And if it came from these two numbers, it will say, and you look up the first number, and it'll say pros, toward, or to motion toward. And then it'll say, and then you look up this other number, and it's telling you what this word comes from. And it'll say, euche, E-U-C-H-E, wish, desire. And I use more than a concordance. I've got all kinds of word study books. And it'll say wish or desire toward. So prayer means to wish or desire oneself towards the will of another by the syllables of the word. And that's how they constructed it. It doesn't say when you look up prayer to bow to the will of God. You have to learn to break things down to the lowest common denominator. You understand that? So learn to break things down when you're looking them up. And don't just use a concordance. Go into these encyclopedias. Go into McClintock and Strong and see what they've got to say. Because they'll tell you, a lot of times you can look up a Greek word in McClintock and Strong and it'll be there. And they'll go a lot deeper. And Mr. Strong is the same man of the Strong's Exhaustive Concordance. He's only going to give us a minimum definition in a Strong's Concordance. You can look in the Kittle's Dictionary of New Testament Greek Words. That's 10 volumes. I've got all kinds of word study books. One man will say something the other doesn't say. Now, so some shall depart from faith. Now, we've gone through faith. Faith is understanding, and that's taking your cross and dying daily. Faith is to understand. And it means in its learning, a learner, by taking your cross. And faith is obedience. And everything that faith is, and faith is one of the fruit of the Spirit, and fruit is singular. So whenever you get into all this and you depart from faith, you depart from all of this. Understanding, learning, daily cross. Cross comes by telling people the truth, and they don't like it. When you define words for them, tell them Christmas is pagan, Easter is pagan, God does not love everybody. When you quote the Bible and say, God said, Jacob have I loved, Esau have I hated before they were born. And people are going to say, that's not fair. Say, well, that's what God said. It don't matter what men think is fair. God said, I loved one and hated the other. So, you depart from everything faith is, and you go to the doctrine of daimonion in 1 Timothy 4:1. Men will depart from faith, and they'll give heed. I believe that's the word prosecco, P-R-O-S-E-C-H-O. Prosecco comes from pros and echo. Well, whenever you look up echo, it'll say to hold. When we say echo, we think of holding a sound. hello, 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 don't we? Echo in the Greek just means to hold. I'm holding this eraser. That's all it means. It means to hold. And pros means toward, same as pros in proseuchomai. That pros, you'll find that prefix all kinds of words. You'll find apo on all kinds of words. Pros means toward. So it means hold oneself, hold your attention towards another doctrine. That's what proseucho means. Give heed. So men will depart from faith and they'll pay attention. The word, when you look it up, means to pay attention. They'll pay attention to the doctrine of daimonion. That's the word right there. They'll pay attention. The only thing that'll pull men away from a daily cross and death to self and self-denial, the thing that'll pull men away from that is doctrines about self. When you make people feel good and give them smooth words instead of great plainness of speech, not words, words. Instead of smooth words, and if you don't give people great plainness, the Bible says in 2 Corinthians 3:12, seeing we have such hope, we use great plainness of speech. Great is the word polis, P-O-L-U-S. It means much, an abundance of plainness. Plainness, what deceives people is this doctrine of the devil, and it's always smooth. If you smooth talk somebody, you con them, don't you? You become a confidence man. You gain their confidence and you slick them out of something and you start crooking them and you tell them smooth words. Plainness is the word parrhesia. Parrhesia. That's the word plainness. It means to be blunt. Now, I've said be blunt to people, and I'm real blunt about preachers not telling the truth. I'm blunt about Kenneth Copeland and T.D. Jakes, and they are very smooth guys. T.D. Jakes is as smooth as silk. The guy has got 1,000 catchphrases, and he just comes on like he's got it together. But if you write his words down, they don't make any sense, do they? He's got this, come on, yeah, and he scoots across the stage and, you don't know, do you? But I know. Yeah, and you got a job in this world. And what does that mean? Yeah, I got a job. I work down at so-and-so. It's foolishness. There's no definition. There's no understanding. There's no meaning. It's just feel good. You can do it, and everybody's going, whoa, yeah, whoa. And you're going, what for? And they all get excited about money and stuff while they're in the meeting, and they go home to their little poverty-stricken trailer, and they don't have enough money, and they give him the last nickel they got, and they don't have enough money to buy groceries or buy bread for tomorrow. You people, I'm looking at the camera. Pay attention to what the preacher's saying, not how good he makes you feel. Feel good doctrine don't pay your bills. It don't put food on the table. Does it? Sure does not. Well, parrhesia is plainness. That's a common word in the New Testament, used all the time by Jesus. The Pharisees came to Jesus and they said, if thou be the Christ, tell us plainly. He used this word parrhesia. They said, be blunt to us. And he said, I don't know what kind of blunt you want. I just told you your father's the devil. What else do you want to hear? If I told you your father's the devil, if thou be the Christ, tell us plainly. I just said you were the devil, and you can't believe because you're not of my sheep. I don't know what you want. Get away from me. They were vessels of wrath. Plainness means, it comes from pas and areo. pos and areo. The whole areo, the whole word. Do not beat around the bush. Don't circumvent a situation. This is what preachers do. When they get it to Romans 8 and 29, for whom he did foreknow, he also did predestinate to become formed in the image of his Son. Then they read through it real fast and they don't want to talk about it. And they talk in circles about it. Well, God predestined everybody. He did not. Don't believe a preacher that says that. The Bible says, moreover, whom he did predestinate, them he also called. Past tense. Aorist indicative is past tense. And whom he called, them he also justified. Aorist indicative, past tense. And whom he justified, them he also glorified. Aorist indicative, past tense, before the foundation of the world. He's already called, justified, and glorified everyone he's predestined. If that's true, then nobody's going to be in hell, right? If he predestined everybody, he's called, justified, and glorified everybody, hasn't he?
He wasted his time making hell.
That's right. God wasted his time making hell. That's right. That's right. So if you blunt, you're not going to talk these smooth words. That's the doctrine of the devil, is smooth talk. Now, this thing called, this is really amazing. I haven't read all the material I've got on demons or daemon. The demons were gods. You know what demons actually were? They were ancestors who were deified as gods. To deify means to make someone a deity. Do you know that's where all the pagan gods come from? That was just somebody's great, 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 great grandfather. Somebody's great, 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 great grandmother.
Isn't that what the Roman Catholic Church has done with all the saints?
Yeah, they've done the same thing with the saints. They say you pray to saints. Pray to saints. Jesus said, when you pray, Our Father which art in heaven. That's not the Apostle Paul. You don't pray to him. You can't bow to the will of Paul, can you? Now, what's amazing, daemonion is the word, our word demon. Daemonion is demon. There's no such thing as demons. Like I keep saying, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. The heart is deceitful above all things. All things. Now the reason I'm quoting this from Jeremiah, the heart is the heart. The heart is deceitful above all things. A thing is not male or female. It's neuter, isn't it? It's neuter gender. A thing is the desk, the floor, the car, the building. That's a thing. All nouns and pronouns are either person, places, or things. That's what a noun is. If it's a person, it'll have to be male or female. If it's a place or thing, it'll be neuter gender, right? So, the heart is deceitful above all neuter gender things, right? Well, whenever you define the word demon in the New Testament, it's always neuter gender. So, your heart, I've said this before, but I hadn't spelled it out. Your heart is deceitful above everything, including demons. So if there is such a thing as a demon, he's a pansy upside your heart. The heart is the most deceitful thing upon the face of the earth. That's what the Bible says. The heart can really be wicked and evil. I've been in business. I know how people can be. They're very wicked and evil. I've been in the music business. I've been in real estate. People can be devious. They'll step in their mother's face to make $1. They'll do anything to make $1. Now, I want to talk to you about where these demons come from. They originally were ancestor worship. It was just worshiping your great-great-great-great-grandparents who they deified, and they deified them as a god. So demons were gods. Demons were gods, or they were ancestors. All gods among the pagans is just their ancestors. It's ancestor worship. They call that Shintoism in Japan. Shintoism. The Shintos is the worship of their ancestors. You even hear them say that in movies and read about it in books. This is our ancestors. Well, the American Indian did that too. The American Indian called these totems. Totem means kinfolk. I said it here last week. The demons, the Jews called their gods demons who distributed fortunes to them. Fortunes. And the Arabs called the same thing the Jews called demons, they called genies. And genie comes from the word gene. And they distribute wishes to you, don't they? So these are gods. These were their gods. They just deified their ancestors. And how many people have you heard? I heard Michael Landon say, right before he died of cancer, he said, told his wife, I'll be a guardian angel watching over you, and I'll distribute fortunes to you. What he was saying is, I'm going to be a demon. A guardian angel is what the Greeks called them. Greeks called them guardian angels. Guardian angel. And Michael, what's his face, says, I'm going to be a guardian angel. There's no such thing as guardian angels. If God works all things after the counsel of his own will, why does he need angels to do it? He doesn't need them. And the word genie comes from gene. Well, guardian angels distribute fortunes. Genies distribute 3 wishes, fortunes, all that's in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. They distribute fortunes. And the fairies, you get your wishes from a fairy, and that's what the Celts called them. They called these, same thing the Jews called demons, they called them fairies, and they would distribute fortunes. And these were all said to be gods of the ancient world. I've got a book. I've never read anything out of it. I just don't have time to read everything I've got. And this is out of Dictionary of Deities and Demons in the Bible by Carl von der Thorn and Peter W. Vanderhorst. And listen to what they say. They did a lot of research on this. The term demon is a rendering of the cognate Greek words daimon, D-A-I-M-O-N, which is our word demon, and its substantive neuter adjectives, daimonion. Post-classical Latin borrowed the words in the forms daimon and daimonion. Original meaning of the term daimon from the time of Homer onward was divinity. Well, how does it mean distribute fortunes if they were divinities? Because all these pagan gods of the ancient world, this all goes back to sun and tree worship. It all goes back to that. And why did they worship the sun? Because they said the sun was burning out at the winter solstice. And I put this on the board 1,000 times, and I put it in the form of these angles. I'm simply showing the sun waning. Waning. The sun wanes because it's going through its ecliptic path. Not the sun, but the earth is going through its path around the sun. And the earth is tilted at 26 degrees. And when it's tilted toward, it tilts away over here. The northern hemisphere tilts away. Oops, don't change there. It gets over here, and it's tilting toward, the northern hemisphere is tilting towards the sun, it's tilting away over here. So when it's tilting away, you're at the winter solstice, December the 21st. December 21st, winter solstice. Winter solstice. And as it comes back here, it comes around, it gets to the spring equinox, or right here. Now this is the reason for the gods that were called demons. And this is why they're going to distribute fortunes. Because you're at the summer solstice, and that's the longest days of the year. And as the earth goes through its path around the sun, it gets over here and they say, oh goodness, the sun's burning out. We're going to have to do something. And it looks like, and everything gets dimmer and dimmer as you get towards the winter solstice, December the 21st. Now this is the whole purpose of demons, the same reason for Christ's Mass. Same thing. You can't even get away from this in teaching on demons. Well, you get to the winter solstice, longest nights of the year. Longest nights. And all the pagans said, the sun's burning out. What are we going to do? It's moving away from the earth. Let's pacify the sun by having a festival. And in each city-state, they would come up with an idea of their sun gods, and they would have a festival. At Rome, they called this festival the Feast of Saturn, and Saturn was the father of the gods. That was the father of the gods at Rome. And they called that festival, that 7-day festival, 7 days. And I'm just simply going back through this to show you where the distributing fortunes comes from. They were gods that distribute fortunes. That's what they were. So you head towards the spring equinox, March 21st. That's when the earth is equal. That's when you have 12 hours in the day and 12 hours in the night. 12 hours, night. And then the sun begins to triumph over darkness, and the next day you got a longer day and a shorter night. And the next day you might have 12 hours and 15 minutes in the day and 11 hours and 45 minutes in that night. But if you're back here at the winter equinox, the fall equinox, the next day after the fall equinox, September the 21st, 22nd, since we got 365 days in a year, they put 21st, 22nd. You've got 12 hours in the day and 12 hours in the night. But the next day over here in the winter, as the sun gets dimmer, you might have 11 hours and 50 minutes in the day and 12 hours and 10 minutes at night. And then it gets longer and longer. And here in Middle Tennessee, at the summer solstice, the sun comes up about 5:30 or 6 o'clock and doesn't set till somewhere close to 9 o'clock at night, 8:45. But when winter hits here, the sun comes up about 7:15, 7:30 sometimes, maybe a little earlier, and it sets about 4:45 in the evening. Now that's the way it is. And they considered that the sun burning out. So what happens with this period of time, they thought gods took their crops down into the underworld. And you had all of these hero gods or hero ancestors, and the gods that took it into the underworld would be Pluto, Styx, and many of these other evil gods of the darkness. So they said, and of course all you have at the coming of the equinox, the winter equinox or the fall equinox, all you have is the end of the harvest. End of harvest. Harvest is over. Harvest is done. And you've had the harvest ever since ever since the previous spring equinox. That would have been March 21st, and the crops start coming in. They come in all the way through the summer till you get down here to the fall equinox, right? So when they quit coming in, the pagans said, oh, the gods are taking our crops down into the underworld. Pluto, Hades. Hades was one of their gods. They had many of their dark gods, and then they had all these hero gods, which were Hercules and Perseus and Attis. They don't know that these gods are the same as these gods. They said it was evil gods that took their crops away from them, took them all the way down here to the fall equinox. And that these hero gods, which was our ancestors, was going to go down into the underworld. And when Perseus went down into the underworld, he crossed the river Styx. He went into Hades and conquered Medusa and brought the head of Medusa back to Argos. And he said he was going to distribute fortunes to the people of Argos. Oh, that's mythology. It's all a lie. And they said when the spring come, that it was Tammuz among the Babylonians would resurrect from the dead, and that was nothing but the crops coming up, and that was fortunes being distributed to the people by Tammuz, who rose from the dead, and it was Ishtar, his mother, that caused him to resurrect, and the English call her Easter, and the Germans call her Ostera. And that's where this thing called Christ's Mass comes from. That's the old pagan festival of Saturn in Rome. And they said, since the winter solstice is December the 21st, we need to appoint a birthday for our sun gods. So they appoint December the 25th. And all of those were demons in the ancient world, resurrecting the crops in the spring. And that's where they're coming up with distributing fortunes. That's why a demon is a deity that distributes fortunes. That's all it is. It's really kind of simple. It took me 50 years to figure this out, but it's the truth. Maybe not that long, but a long time. So, everything that Christmas is about, and they put this festival in the church, the festival of Saturn. Constantine did that in 325 A.D., renamed it Christ Mass of Roman Catholicism. The Mass is eating human flesh. And boy, how long could I go on that? All night long, couldn't I? So, the fact that demons distribute fortunes is because they're gods that's going into the underworld and bringing up the crops in the spring, and that's the fortunes they distribute. Jeremiah 10?
Yeah, I do.
All right. Well, I'll read it then. Mary likes Jeremiah 10. That's one of her favorite. And all the female deities were tree goddesses. Tree goddesses, whether it's Aphrodite or whether it's Dione of the Ephesians, they were all represented in the form of a tree. And all the male deities were represented as the sun gods, and the sun was represented by the fire upon the earth, and those were the fire gods. Those were the fire demons. And I'll read that, and then I got to get on with this. But Jeremiah 10, the Bible says, "Learn not the way of the heathen, neither be dismayed at the signs of the heavens. Hear ye the word of the Lord, speaketh unto you, the house of Israel. Thus saith the Lord, learn not the way of these heathens that worship these sun gods. And be not dismayed at the signs of the heavens, for the heathen are dismayed at them." They're dismayed at the signs of the heavens because they worship the gods. They deified all these gods in the stars. And they were dismayed. They said, the stars are starving us to death and we're going to lose all our crops. And that goes back to the swastika, doesn't it? The wheel of the year, which is nothing but the Big Dipper. They were dismayed at the Big Dipper, wasn't they? All of this goes, this is the demons. I don't know if I've stopped to take this much time to show you this, but of course I've showed you the swastika before. The swastika is nothing but,
You didn't read Jeremiah.
I'm going to. This is what they were dismayed at. All the Big Dipper is, it's the 4 phases of the Big Dipper at midnight, at the winters, at the summer solstice, at the fall equinox, at the winter solstice, and the spring equinox. Right here. See this point right here? Right here, and right here is the wheel of the year. And they were dismayed when they got around here to the winter. They studied the stars, and they knew that the Big Dipper had to be over here before spring would come. It had to be there at midnight. And they were dismayed when it got over here because winter was here. This right here would be equivalent to this right here. And they were dismayed at the signs of heaven. And all this is the swastika, and the swastika is the wheel of the year. We get the wreath from that. I got this all messed up here. So when you got the Big Dipper and its 4 phases at midnight at these equinoxes and the solstices, what you've got is you've got the where it comes from. Hitler didn't invent that. Whoever come up with the idea that Hitler did that, he didn't do that. God did that. And they worshipped it, and they were dismayed at this. That's what they was dismayed at. When he says, be not dismayed at the signs of heavens, they worshipped this. Swastika. Swastika is the Big Dipper. And they said a God had to be turning that in the heavens. They said the Queen of Heaven had to be turning it. Queen of Heaven. And the Queen of Heaven in the Roman Catholic Church is the Mary of Roman Catholicism, not the Mary of the Bible. Good grief. So the swastika and the Big Dipper are one and the same. Now let me read this. And then they go back, and this is the same thing as this. It's the same as this. It's the same as the earth going through its orbit. And God tilted the earth at 26 degrees, and it goes around the sun like that. And when it gets over here, the northern hemisphere is leaning towards the sun. Gets over here, it's leaning away. And they're saying, oh, we're losing the sun, and we got to have that to have our crops, and oh, we're all going to die. So they went to the gods, and what's amazing, God tells Israel, if you're obedient to me and you keep my statutes and my commandments, I'll give you crops. And every one of these gods, these demons, were fertility gods. Every one of them were fertility gods. Hercules was a fertility god. Zeus was a fertility god. It doesn't matter whether it's the Scandinavian countries, where it is. They were all fertility gods that would give the people all the crops they wanted. And God says, I'm the fertility God. I'll give you crops in the spring when you're obedient to me. When you're not, I'll send the sword, the famine, the pestilence, and the beast. That's what God said he'd do.
Rabbits and eggs at Christmas.
Now look here. He says, so that's what this is talking about. Learn not the way of the heathen, and be not signs of the heavens. They were dismayed when the Big Dipper got in the wrong place. They're always reading the stars. For the heathen are dismayed at them. The heathen are dismayed when the Big Dipper gets down here. We got to get it back up here. Oh, Queen of Heaven, turn the wheel of the year and get this back around here so we can have crops and distribute fortunes to us. Just astounding. Be not dismayed at the signs of heaven, for the heathen are dismayed at them. For the customs of the people are vain. All these people that do all this stuff, those are not gods. Thou believe that there is one God, thou doest well. Jehovah God is the only God. Be not dismayed, for the customs of the people are vain. The customs are vain. Not just their gods. Celebrating Christmas is vain. Celebrating Easter is vain. It's not true. It's paganism. For one cutteth the tree out of the forest, the work of the hands of the workman, with the axe. They deck it with silver and with gold. Now, they put literal silver and gold back then, but we put garlands of, I don't anymore. But America puts garlands around the tree of silver and gold, don't they? They deck it with silver and gold. They fasten it with nails and hammers so it doesn't move. And they nail it to a little stand. They put some cotton around it and a little cloth, and they put all their gifts under it. And the gifts, that's really amazing. The gifts are a type of distributing fortunes. And that goes back to, you realize I can't even get away from this talking about demons. The gifts go back to the tree in the garden. Tree in the garden. And that's distributing fortunes. That's what the word daimonion means. Tree in the garden. And Eve looked at the tree. Adam and Eve, first man and first woman. In the garden, Genesis 3, Eve looked at the tree and saw a tree that's good for food. It was pleasant to the eye. It would make her wise. And John said, this is all the fortunes. He didn't say fortunes, but this is what he meant. All the fortunes that are in the world. All that's in the world, 1 John 2, 16, 17. All of the fortunes that are in the world, all the fortunes in the world is the lust of the flesh, lust of the eye, pride of life. That's what Eve saw in the tree. It was pleasant to the eye, lust of the eye, good for food, lust of the flesh. Make her wise. She could be proud. And you get 3 wishes from the genie. You get wishes from the fairy. A demon distributes fortunes. And this is where demons began, in the garden. And they deified Adam and Eve as their original gods. And then after the flood, they deified Nimrod as the father of these sun gods. And Nimrod is just the original prototype for, he is the original god that they deified as Hercules, Adonis, Attis, you name them. Wherever you find them, that's nothing but Nimrod, our ancestor. That's all it is. So this is what they were. Let me read some more on this. Let me read the rest of this. They deck it with silver and gold. They fasten it with nails and hammers that it move not. They are upright as the palm tree, but speak not. They must needs be born. You have to carry that god around because he can't walk. It's a false god. It's a tree goddess. Because they cannot go, be not afraid of them, for they cannot do evil. These gods are not gods at all. They're man's imagination, aren't they? Also it is not in them to do good, for as much as there is none like unto thee, O Lord, thou art great, and thy name is great in might. Who would not fear thee, O King of nations, talking about Jehovah God, for to thee doth it appertain, for as much as among all wise men of the nations, and in all their kingdoms there is none like unto you. In all these kingdoms that worship all these gods, there's none like God, but they are altogether brutish. These people that worship these gods are brutish. They are ba'ar. They are dull of hearing. Dull of hearing. Remember, the hearing ear and the seeing eye of the Lord hath made even both of them. They are stupid. Ba'ar means stupid. Stupid means you can't hear. You can't be taught. It means to have the understanding of a brute beast. Of an animal you can't teach anything, just stupid. That's what the Bible calls them. They're altogether brutish and foolish. Foolish, kesil, means silly. K-E-C-I-Y-L. K-E-C-I-Y-L. That's a common word that just means foolish. That's really funny. I don't mean hilarious funny. It's really funny because as the sun is waning and becoming dimmer, Orion came out in the winter, and they called Orion. They said Orion pulled the sap down out of the vines and out of the trees, and all the leaves died. They said that it was Orion, called the evening star. And the name Orion in Old Testament Hebrew is Kisel. That's funny, isn't it? It means foolish. When you're foolish when you believe that Orion is bringing... That's God that's got the earth on its axis. That's not these gods. Except in Christmas and Easter, you got and all the Celts, they celebrated their gods at the beginning of the dark period, right here at the fall equinox. They celebrate their god in the form of Samhain. And Samhain was right here on the Big Dipper. It was right here. Oh, excuse me. Right here. And Yule was right here. These were all festivals. And Ostera was right here. And these were seasons of the year, and they get dismayed when everything got out of kilter. Oh, we're losing the sun. Let's offer sacrifices to him during a 7-day festival called Saturnalia. And Constantine brought that in the church and renamed it Christ's Mass because he was about to lose the empire to all these hordes that are rampaging across Europe. He said, I've got to do something. He had the Huns and the Vandals and the Gauls and just raging across the European continent. He said, I will amalgamate their gods and our Jehovah God, and I'll put them together. That way they're welcome into the church, and everybody can be in the church together, unbelievers and believers.
You didn't tell what Samhain was.
Huh?
Samhain's Halloween.
Samhain's Halloween. This is Halloween right here, Samhain. This is Yule, or Christ's Mass. Yule means wheel. This is the wheel of the year. And then you had, at the spring equinox, you had Ostera. And that was up at this point right here. Mardi Gras was right here. Mardi Gras is the same thing. That's the Franks form of it. They had a 7-day festival in the middle of winter. Gosh, I can't get through all that. They had a 7-day festival. And since they had 360 days in their year, they would start that on February the 7th, end on February the 14th, have a 7-day festival, and that would be the last day, and they called this, the last day was on a Tuesday, and they would call it Fat Tuesday or Mardi Gras. Mardi Gras and Christmas are one and the same. And it's all the worship of demons or the gods of the old world in hopes that they would bring back crops in the spring and distribute fortunes to them. That's what a demon is. It's not real. It's wrong. I can't believe that the world doesn't know some of this. And 40 days after, in the next day after the 14th, they would start mourning for their God on that Wednesday, and they mourned 40 days, and they called that, and the Catholics brought that in the Roman Catholic Church and called that Ash Wednesday on the 15th, and 40 days until March the 25th. March 25th, they would mourn for 40 days, and the Catholics brought that in the Roman Catholic Church and called it Lent. And on March the 25th, exactly 9 months, the pregnancy time of a woman, 9 months later, December the 25th, the sun god would be born, according to the pagans in the ancient world. Goodness sakes, help us for all this foolishness going on in America. They call holidays. I don't celebrate any holidays, not even July the 4th. Because July the 4th is not Independence Day in America. July the 2nd is. July the 2nd is the day they signed it. July the 4th is the day they announced it. It's just dumb. Besides that, what is this patriotic? Patriotic comes from pater, and our Father is God. Pater means Father. Our Father is God. It's not those guys up there in Washington. That's a bunch of charlatans up there. They're there for money and power, and they were deists. They believed there's a God out there that spun all the earth in orbit and walked away from it and said, God was from the south. He said, y'all take care of it. Y'all. I got to read some more of this. This is out of this book on demons and deities. It was a divinity denoting either an individual god or goddess, Aphrodite, or the deity as unspecified unity. The deity will put it in your mind, daimonia, means reverence for the divinity or simply religion. And then they say here on, I can't even read all this. I got to read something else to you. Well, let me read this. I just noticed something here. 2 verbs from this root are important in biblical and related literature, daimoneo and daimonizomai. But listen to this. Daimonizomai. D-A-I-M-O-N-I-Z-O-M-A-I. Do y'all remember that word? Huh? You remember what it means? Huh? Daimonizomai is the derivative of daimonion, right? D-A-I-M-O-N-I-Z-O-M-A-I. Now this word daimonizomai is the word translated possessed with devils. A derivative of daimonion. D-A-I-M-O-N-I-O-N. It's a derivation of that. Now remember the man in Luke 8. Luke 8. And also the same man is described in Mark 5 and Matthew 8. This is the man of the Gadarenes. Matthew 8. He's described possessed with devils. And the Bible says, after Jesus cast out, and demons are self, because self, the shadow would be these gods over here, and the image would be the very image. The law having a shadow of good things to come, and there's shadows among the evil things as well as among the good. And the gods that distribute fortunes over here is self, isn't it? Isn't that what it is now? I want to fulfill my flesh and everything I want. I don't care who it hurts and who I have to hurt to get what I want. Well, possessed with devils, the man in Luke 8, the Bible said he was possessed with devils. Mark's account said he's possessed with devils. Matthew 8 says he's possessed with devils. I believe what Jesus cast out of the man was the desire for self. You say, would Jesus transgress the law of nature? Oh, yes, he would. Jesus stood up in a boat one time and told the wind to be quiet, and it hushed. Jesus rose from the dead. He walked on water. He said, I am God. I can transgress the laws of physics. And when I do this, this proves I'm God. Nobody can walk on water and defy the laws of buoyancy, can they? Nobody can do that. Unless it's a God who created those laws. Well, the Bible says, right before it says that he drove out the swine, I believe it was the desire for self. because Jesus said demons were self when he rebuked him in Mark, the 1st chapter. And the man had an unclean spirit. He had an unclean daimonion. And Jesus rebuked him, and the word him is A-U-T-O. Auto is the word self. In English, automobile is self-mobile. You don't have to pull it. It's a horseless carriage. It motivates itself. It's self-mobile. No more horses to pull cars. So, auto is self. Jesus rebuked self. So when the man comes, the Bible says that when the people from the city came out and found this man in Luke 8, they found him sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind. When he had the demonizomai, he was out of his mind, but after Jesus drove this possessed with devils out, he was in his right mind, and the word is sophroneo, S-O-P-H-R-O-N-E-O, and sophroneo means sane. So before Jesus drove this out, he was insane, and possessed with devils means to be insane. That's what it means. Well, let me read this to you. Okay, daimonion and demonizomai both originally meant to be under the power of a god or a demon. In the pagan world, that's what it meant. Which condition was often a blessing, producing prophetic utterance or heroic behavior. It could also be a curse, and the words could mean to be insane. That's funny, isn't it?
Like being a schizo, wouldn't it?
It meant to be nuts. You mean a guy's tearing his body and cutting his body and screaming and yelling, he's naked, and he's living in a bunch of tombs, he's not crazy? Certainly he was. In later authors, especially Jewish and Christian, they come to mean to be possessed with a demon which caused bodily infirmity or insanity, in the sense to be insane. It was used pejoratively of the ravings of heretics. Demonizomai is found once in New Testament as a verb in the phrase cruelly tormented by demons, just meant to be crazy, meant to be insane. That was an idiom.
So that was a manifestation of
And
self.
that's right, manifestation of self. When self gets so frustrated he can't have what self wants, it gets nuts. I have been there as a young man. Just, I want to beat the walls in with a fist. And I'd do that. I was crazy. That's what insanity is. So, I mean, he bears out what I've been saying all along. It means insanity. That's what it means. Now, let me put this down. All right, where was I? All right, so we talked about these possessed with devils meant to be crazy or insane, and that's demonizomai. Oh, I got something else I got to read to you. This comes out of, I've read this before, but there's part of it I hadn't. Eudaimonism. This is out of Hastings Encyclopedia of Religion that's over here on the shelf. I've got a set up here and a set at home. Eudaimonism. E-U-D-A-I-M-O-N-I-S-M. Eudaimonism. It comes from eu and daimon. Now, eudaimon daimonion means to distribute fortunes, doesn't it? Distribute fortunes. Eu means well. Means a well distribution of fortunes, doing it well. Boy, that's amazing. Out of Hastings, eudaimonism may be defined as the theory that the ethical end, the ultimate object to be achieved by action and conduct, the standard and final criterion of what ought to be, is welfare. welfare. They're telling us that eudaimonism means a well-faring, a well-journey. Whew. That sounds very closely to eudaio, doesn't it? A well-road. You see, the devil's got a counterfeit for everything else. Welfare is not to be regarded as identical with happiness, although the latter term has been widely and even generally employed as a rendering of the Greek word which welfare most truly represents. He's talking about eudaimonism. Happiness may, of course, be so defined and understood by a moral philosopher as to become the technical equivalent of welfare, but this involves an unnatural divorce from the meaning which bears in ordinary speech and literature, where happiness and undoubtedly connotes pleasure as an essential and predominant, if not as its sole constituent, and signifies, in fact, a life full of pleasures, well selected and arranged. What if I said a life full of distributing fortunes? Eudaimonism finds its typical exponent in Aristotle, whose famous definition of welfare, Aristotle's definition of welfare was eudaimonia. His definition of welfare was good demons. And they called their gods demons. When you see an old movie on Saturday afternoon, it's about some Roman movie, and it's back in the first century, and someone says, "May the gods go with you." Hercules or Perseus, "May the gods go with you." They meant, what they said was, "May the demons go with you." That's what they said. "May the daimonion go with you." And let me read something. Let me see here. It is, of course, of essence of eudaimonism that it is teleological. It looks forward and makes for an end, and that end is not precisely or mainly righteousness, which implies a pre-existing ruling lawgiver. Herein is a contradistinguished from all that class of ethical theory which is retrospective and introspective, bidding us look back to a law once delivered, or inward to a perpetual and infallible monitor dictating duty without regard to consequences. They're saying this mainly is talking about your duty without any regard to consequences. Eudaimonism does take account of consequences, not only of those immediate consequences, which even for the institutionist commonly form part of the act or thing to be done or eschewed. But let me read something to you here. This is Webster's dictionary, and you look up the word eudaimonia. Eudaimonism. Listen to this. This means a good demon, or a good welfare, or good distributing fortunes. Eudaimonia, happiness, blessed with a good genius. Oh, that's what the Romans called genius. Comes from the word genie. That's what the Arabs called genies. Good genius, fortunate, daemon, happiness, as well as specificity. Eudaimonism means to call to be happy. The ethical doctrine that personal happiness is chief good and the proper aim of action. Such happiness conceived of in terms of well-being based on virtuous and rational self-realization. When you get into self-realization, like all of these people teach in these seminars, you're realizing self, and self deserves these things. And that's what you do when you go to the doctrine of the devil. You go to the doctrine of self. I've got a book, Life of Thomas Jefferson. The writer will tell you that Jefferson founded America on the doctrines of eudaimonism. He founded this nation. It looks real good from a distance. It's one of the crookedest, lyingest nations in the history of the world. Behind the scenes, people don't mean anything that they say, do they? No, if you live here, you know that. No, it's full of sin. Anybody that's painted a picture like we've got on the front of America, it's a facade. It's absolutely a facade because none of the things that has been attributed to Jefferson and Franklin and Washington and the boys is true. Not the history, not the wars. They wrote this history, and people say, Jim Brown, you're making that up. I'll tell you what, you go to Books A Million, Barnes & Noble, and ask for books by Richard Shankman or James Loewen. They are historians, live in America. James Loewen has got a book called Lies My Teacher Told Me. Adolf Hitler got his, this is not something I made up, this is in the Library of Congress. Adolf Hitler got his idea of exterminating the Jews by studying what America did to the American Indian, and he studied it in the 1920s. And that was called eugenics. We had a program of eugenics. Eugenics means genes. And we had in Virginia, back in the 20s, we had a eugenics program. And what that was, it was sterilizing the less people who were not as smart, people who were maybe they were slow. We had to get rid of them. America was doing that, and it was going on in West Virginia, particularly the seat of it was Lynchburg, West Virginia. That's where Jerry Falwell's ministry used to be. I think he was one of the recipients of that program. They took his brain out or something. Yeah, eugenics. America did that. They annihilated the American Indian. They oppressed the black man in America, and then they called themselves Christians. After World War II, they put all these, or during World War II, they put all these Japanese Americans in prison camps and concentration camps in America. Said it don't matter if you're for America, you're Japanese, and America's been doing this to people, other races for forever, haven't they? Most people don't even know this. They're walking around dumb. People walk around, duh, I think America's wonderful. I think Thomas Jefferson's great and George Washington. I love my nation. Let me wave my flag. They don't even know. We didn't have a national anthem till 1931. That's 8 years before I was born. No American flags flew over any of the buildings in America or any of the ships till the 1840s. That's during the Mexican-American Wars, long after the War of 1812, long time after the War of Independence. Someone asked Ben Franklin, said, what does the American flag look like? He said, I think it's got red, white, and blue stripes. I don't know. We've been sold a bill of goods in America. I've told the story before. I went into Texas A&M in the fall of 1957. Went into the American history class, and the professor said, I am not allowed to tell you the truth about American history in 1957. I'll give you information. You give it back to me the way I tell it to you. And I fell out of my chair that day. And I studied it years later, and I found out we've been lied to. But like the fellow that comes here that was retired military, he said whoever wins the war gets to write the history. Don't we? We write the history. It don't matter. We're not any different. Man's nature is sinful. If the heart is deceitful above all things, America is just like all the other aggressive nations that's ever lived. Every one of them were land grabbers in the 1800s. All the presidents. There's a real good book called Presidential Ambition by Richard Shankman. You can pick it up. And he goes into these presidents of America and levels them. We had one homosexual president, James Buchanan. That was back in the 1800s. Nobody said anything about it. And his boyfriend, girlfriend lived in the White House with him. I think it's funny because they think it's all wonderful and they're patriotic, but they don't want to recognize that. And they called James Buchanan's boyfriend, girlfriend, they called him Miss Fancy, the Congress did. God, gosh, you just want to bang your head, going, what in the world is... This is called great plainness of speech. I'll tell the truth. I don't care if they shoot me. When you get tired of this world, you feel like Paul, I have a desire to depart and be with Christ, which is far better than this. Don't you? Do I have any time, Mike? I went through this Christmas thing. I've been meaning to do this to show that the gods of the fire worship, that's the same thing that Israel went after, called Baal in the Grove. This is utterly astounding. Israel went after these same gods, Baal, all through the Old Testament, Baal and the Grove. And Baal was the sun god, represented by the fire upon the earth. The Grove was the tree goddess. And this is amazing. This is the tree goddess. And this is what Constantine brought in the church. Constantine, he brought all this sun worship in the church and renamed it Christ's Mass and Ishtar, Easter. Christ's Mass, Easter, and America embraces all that. He renamed it that, and because, now here's the amazing thing. Israel went after all these pagan gods, so God says they were a nation for 500 years. 500 years. From 1 Samuel to 2 Chronicles. This is the time of Israel as a kingdom, 2 Chronicles. And God tells them when they come out of Egypt, they're over here before their 500 years in the wilderness, they're 300 years being ruled by judges. That's from the first judge. They're all this time, they're 500 years ruled by kings. From Saul, the first man king, to Zedekiah, the last king. Before that, they were 300 years under judges. 300 by judges. And that was from Othniel, or actually, literally, it was from Samuel. Samuel, then Joshua, and then Othniel, all the way to Samson. And he was, well, actually to Samuel, really. Samson is the last one in the book of Judges, but Samuel was actually the last judge. And before that, they're 40 years in the wilderness. Before that, they're 400 years in Egypt. And the reason they were in Egypt was because they were put in captivity there, put in bondage there. They were delivered from bondage in Egypt, bondage, after 400 years there in Exodus, the first chapter, they go into bondage. The 12th chapter of Exodus, they come out. And then God tells Moses when he goes up on the mountain at the beginning of the 40 years in the wilderness, he says, you tell Israel, if they're obedient to me, I'll send crops, and you'll go against your enemy one way, and they'll flee 7 ways, and you'll conquer all your enemies, and you'll have children, they'll all be healthy. But he said, if you go after these other gods, I'm going to send 4 judgments, the sword. That'll be your enemies coming against you. I'll send the famine. That'll be either no rain, or I'll have your enemy come in and take your crops away. I'll send famine. I'll send a pestilence. That'll be disease of all kind. And if you're not obedient to these judgments here, I'll finally send the beast, which was Babylon, Persia, Greece, and then Rome. And I'll have you carried away into captivity. And they went after this Baal and Grove, which were demons. Baal was the same thing as Hercules. The grove was the same thing as Aphrodite. She was the upright goddess. They were the same thing under a different name. So God scatters them all over the face of the earth. After 500 years as a nation, 722 B.C., northern Israel goes into captivity by the Assyrians. And in 586 B.C., southern Judah is carried into captivity by the Babylonians. Then Babylon is overthrown by Persia, and Persia is overthrown by Greece. Babylon is Iraq now. Persia is Iran now. Greece is Greece. And then Rome, the Roman Empire took over and conquered all of these. And they were in captivity because of this same thing here, this demon worship, which were gods, their ancestors, and they thought their ancestors were going to distribute fortunes in the spring. And that's why they went into captivity. And they came back, and God kept telling them, I'm going to scatter you, and I'm going to bring you back. And they came back to Israel. In 1896, Theodore Herzl started Zionism in France because he saw a Jew killed on the streets of France. And then in 1917, General Allenby marched into Jerusalem, liberated Jerusalem for the first time in 400 years. They had been ruled by the Ottoman Turks, and then they were liberated here. And then the Balfour Declaration was issued. Now this is all due to Israel worshiping demons. Demons is not any different than Christmas. It's not any different than prophecy. It's all the same picture. Even tongues fits in here, doesn't it? When they're scattered, they all had to come back every year for 3 feasts. When they come back for the 3 feasts, they're speaking all these different languages from all over the world. They're speaking all of these gloss and dialects, aren't they? Notice how every subject I teach goes into the same thing. You teach on demons, you're teaching on Christmas. Because the demons were their ancestor gods that was going to distribute the crops in the spring. And God says, I'm the one that does that. So they're scattered all over the face of the earth. The Balfour Declaration is issued in 1920 after 400 years of misrule by the Ottoman Turks. In 1948, May 14th, the Balfour Declaration expires, and they're declared a nation for the first time in 2,600 years because they had gone after Baal and the Grove, or these demons of the ancient world. You just want to throw your hands up and go, why? I don't know, why does America live the way they live? Why they live without any definition? Everything's a smiley face. Behind the scenes they're stabbing each other and stealing and lying to each other. I know they do that in the rest of the world. But what I'm trying to say is America is putting on a face. America is flesh like everybody else. If you put on a funny face and you put on a fancy smiley face, it's phony. If you never frown and you never groan and say, oh me, life is tough, and America tries to sell themselves to the world as this goody-goody nation, and it's not. So the Balfour Declaration expires, and the Palestinians, the PLO at that time, you got different terrorist groups. Now you have Hamas, and you got a new group out of Iran, and you got the other terrorist organizations, Al-Qaeda, and you got Hamas, and you got the guys in Lebanon. What do you call them? Huh? The Taliban. You got all of these guys. And so they tell Israel, if you support anyone who goes in with Israel in this new nation, if you support them, you are automatically in jihad with us. So America has been in jihad, which is a holy war, with all the Arab nations since May 14, 1948, when Harry Truman, President of the United States, pressured the world to declare Israel a nation for the first time in 2,600 years, all because they went after demon gods, but the Palestinians had been occupying the land. So they come over and they bomb the World Trade Center. The reason the World Trade Center went down is because Israel celebrated Christmas under another name in the ancient world. And that's the truth. It seems like the biggest mess, doesn't it? That's where demons are. If you believe that demons are going to give us crops this coming spring, then we can start worshiping them. Or if you believe my garden is going to grow because that's the natural ecological system of nature, and God controls the nature, then we're not going to serve these demons. That's where demons come from. Demons and Christmas and the World Trade Center and Easter and Mardi Gras, you can't separate, and tongues, you can't separate any of it. It's all one huge synthesized mishmash picture. It's like, whew. And you think God's going to let this nation keep doing it? America is just the center of it. America is, everybody wants to come to America and get a piece of the action. Don't they? It's what it is. And America is the most corrupt nation, I believe, on the face of the earth because they live in hypocrisy, smiling. Hi, we're all Christians. We all these Baptist churches here that don't teach the truth. But we love you.
They say they come to help the needy, but they're for the greedy.
Huh?
They say they come to help the needy, but they're for the greedy.
They are the greedy. If you really want to see a series that's just unbelievable, watch The Men Who Built America. Whew! Rockefeller, Vanderbilt, and those guys, Dale Carnegie, not Dale, Andrew Carnegie. Andrew Carnegie, those guys were sleaze. And they actually built a nation on their greed. They would bury each other. They didn't care. This Youngstown flood is the worst flood in the history of America. Youngstown, Pennsylvania. There's a dam just above Youngstown. It was either Carnegie or one of the super rich guys, and they had a dam up there, and he said, I want to be able to drive my buggy across the dam. I want it leveler and cut down where it's wide enough for a buggy. And people said, you can't do that. The dam will break, and the people will drown in Youngstown. I don't care. I want to be able to drive my buggy across it. Just how selfish he was. They bring this out in the Men Who Built America. And they cut it down. And one day the dam breaks open and drowns everybody in Youngstown. Just because he wants to have a buggy ride. I'll take a chance on them being drowned if I can have a buggy ride the way I want it. I have a desire to, when the more you live for Christ, more you live godly, the more you live according to the exact truth and say, here's the truth, deal with it. The more you do that, the more tired you get of the world. I don't care about, I'm at a place, I'm going to tell the truth, and if somebody says, we're going to shoot you, I say, can I paint a bullseye on my head? Be sure and hit me right in the head. Don't cripple me, just kill me, okay? We live in corruption. I don't believe America's a Christian nation at all. If you're Christian, you're like Christ, and you'll preach his words and say what he said, and people will hate you for it. He said, if the world hated me, it'll hate you. Well, did they hate Jesus? Well, they killed him for his words. Didn't they? You tell the truth, and people are not going to like it. Especially a place like America when everything's nice, and we're living a fluffy life, and isn't everything, and I'm kind of dizzy and drunk, and it's a cotton candy world, and isn't this great? You wake people up and say, wake up! And they say, don't you wake me up. We'll kill you. We'll crucify you. I'm out of time. I didn't get to a lot of things I wanted to, but I went wanting to show you that what America was built upon was Eudaimonism. Jefferson's biographer says that. Says he built it, he patterned it after that, especially after the French Revolution. It's just, I don't believe the best thing for a man is everything he wants. I don't believe that's good for a man at all. I believe the best thing for a man that's a believer is trial and tribulation and persecution, so it'll cause him to bow to the will of God, if he's a believer. Let's pray. Father, thank you for truth. Lord, thank you for this picture. Lord, the problem with men is they can't see that they're the demon. There are no demons. It's just us, Lord, when we're rebellious against you and seeking the flesh and seeking the fortunes of this world. Deal with our hearts and crush us under your hand, Lord. If you don't crush us, we won't be crushed, and you said you came to the bruised or the crushed. Lead us to your elect family. We praise you for all things. Mature the sheep. Open up doors, and we'll give you praise in Christ's name. Amen. Been meaning to say that for a long time and try to get everybody to understand that the demons in Christmas are all the same. Ah.